Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to all of you. It's great to see you coming along to our Landlord Information Evening. My name is Gary Brown. I'm the licensee of Ray White Whangaparaoa, and my talk tonight is going to be on the myths of property investment and on how we provide for our retirement, what that entails. So we're going to look in a little bit in depth as what the figures need to be. It'll be interesting to see how many people have taken some steps towards achieving that. If you're in property, you'll be relieved. If not, you might be a little bit nervous. How many of you look after your properties yourself, as in private landlords? Oh, lots of you guys. Okay. You're going to find tonight's talk quite interesting. And how many of you are with another company? Don't worry, we're not going to kick you out. One there, two, three, own up, 4, 5. Awesome. Okay, that's great. It's really good to have you. And we're going to have some fun tonight. So the big thing is, let's look at our retirement. And I have a question for you. How much money do you think per annum would be a reasonable amount for you to retire on? Any thoughts from the audience? 60,000? We've got 60,000 here. Do you think that would be 80? 100? Okay. Any others? Anyone else? Anyone more than that? Less than that? 40? Okay. So you probably find that 40 is an amount that you might need, and 80 or 100 might be an amount that you want, depending on how much travel you want to do, how many grandkids you've got, how expensive your children are. Some of us have expensive children, expensive tastes. Some of us have expensive tastes, but we'd work it out from that. What I'm going to go through here, I've provided in your packs that you have in front of you, you'll notice that there is a sheet, which we'll get to now. It's your retirement income calculator. If you want to pull that out, it should be the one behind the Who Am I yellow sheet on the front. Now, we're not going to do a class setup here and actually fill it out right here. That's for you to take home and work out on your own. I have done a mock one, and I've based it on 60,000, which I figured between 40 and 100, that's probably the midpoint. So thanks for that. And if you need 100, you obviously just alter the figures, and you'd work them out yourselves to do that. But what we're covering here is not for each person individually. It's just a generic concept idea for you to look at. And then the forms are for you to take home and work it out for yourself. If you want to get into more in-depth detail about it, I'm looking for Scott Charlesworth. He's from the loan market. Scott is my personal advisor for all my home loans for my property investment portfolio. And I cannot fault him. And if you want to find out what you can do and what you can't do in financing to get equity out of your home, Scott would be the one to speak to, and he's here tonight. So that's the income calculator, and basically we're going, how much do you need to retire on? How much do you want to retire on? So if you're looking at how much you want to retire on, obviously it'll be more. And how much, what age would you like to retire? You can answer that question on your own. And how many years away is that? I don't need to know now. But if you're like me and you're only 40, it's not far away. Okay, how much money do I need to have as capital to be able to enjoy that level of income? And how much do I need to save per month? Now, to calculate the capital amount required, you'd take the income you would like to retire on, less your super if you're going to do it at 65, but certainly I wouldn't. And then you divide that by 3.15%, which is the prevailing bank interest rate. If you're going to have your money in the bank, that's how much the interest is for you to get paid out your 60,000 a year we're looking at the moment. So let's find out and do those sums and see what happens. To calculate the amount we need to save each month, I'm going through this because it's in your form there. And when you're at home, if you've got any questions, now's the time to ask to know how to fill that out. But we've done a generic one, which we're going to hand out soon, not just yet. We've done a generic one, which we will hand out, and it's all filled out based on 60,000 and based on someone being 40, retiring in 20 years' time when they're 60, But it could be someone who's 20 and retiring in 20 years' time when they're 40, or you might be 40 like me and want to retire in 10 years or 20 years' time at 60. It might work. Geez, that worked. No one laughed. I do look young. Okay. And so here it is. If the girls would like to hand them out, that would be great. This is a retirement plan income calculator that's been filled out. So you've got a sheet, and you can compare that with the sheet you haven't yet filled out of your own one. Don't lie about your age. Doesn't work with this. The years are the years, unfortunately. Okay. So we're just working on 60,000. I think that's straightforward. We'll go through. So how much do you need to have as capital to be able to enjoy that level of income? It works out that you need 1.9 million. How many of you started saving that? Because 60,000 is not a lot. We picked at the midpoint of what we need to retire on. Anybody started saving that up? Putting away $7,916 per month after you've paid your tax on it, of course. I wonder what it would be without the tax, the amount before you've paid tax on it. It would be a whopping $11,814. That's scary, scary stuff. What we get the other side of the coin, where we get people that have had a bad experience in property investing. And I'm sure you've all heard people say, oh, property is a terrible investment, I'll never touch it. Many of us have had a bad experience ourselves. I certainly have. Who's had a bad experience here? We've got lots of them. If I got the property managers up here, they'd have you in fits of laughter. Toilets backing up, 3 o'clock in the morning phone calls. Do you remember that one? And the sewage spilling out through the property. Man, I'm glad they didn't phone me. They told me the next day. Anyway, I'd like to share a story of Susan. Susan came up to me and said, Gary, I've been... I don't know why you're such an advocate for property investment. And I said, why? She said, well, I've been there and done that, and it's terrible. So I said, well, what happened? She said, well, in the late 90s, my husband and I decided we were going to get into property investment, so we bought a property in Red Beach. And we had it for a little over a year, or a little just on a year, and we found that the tenants weren't paying the rent. They didn't pay the rent on time. They didn't look after the gardens. We had no end of trouble. We had the neighbours complaining about the tenants. And we were getting ourselves into trouble at the bank because we had to keep forking in money. So we made deals with the tenants to pay off this outstanding money that they owed. And they defaulted on that. They still couldn't even afford the rent. So how were they going to also afford the back pay in rent? That was in arrears. And this went on. And eventually we got so frustrated with it that we decided to sell the property. So we gave the tenants their notice, and we got them out. We tidied up the property and we sold it. I said, okay. Can I ask you guys, just before we go on with that story, what's wrong with it so far? What's... No. But what was wrong? Was it the property? No. If they'd given it to a property management company to look after for them, someone who knew how to handle tenants, the problem with a lot of these tenants, they do tend to target private landlords because they know that you guys don't have the facilities that we have available to go and check the tenants out on the internet and the resources that we have to check the backgrounds on the tenants. So they know that you don't have those facilities available, and they'll come in and prey on the private landlords, which is quite unfortunate. So anyway, so I said to Susan, well, give us the facts. Let's, that's the emotional side, and that's what happened. Yes, it was a bad experience with the tenants, but let's look at the real facts of the property. What did you pay for it? She said, well, I paid $180,000 for it. And I said, well, And the following year, when you sold it, how much did you sell it for? 220. And we had to pay a estate agent's commission. Yeah. That's probably 10,000. So she's got 30,000. She put 36,000 in, which I'm not sure if they put it in cash or whether they took it out of equity of their own home. But if they took it out of equity in their own home, they've actually put nothing in. But they took out 66,000 a year later. And that's a terrible investment. Return of 83%. And that's a terrible investment. Do you agree? I shook my head. I absolutely shook my head. Because clearly the problem was just managing the tenants. I think managing it yourself is kind of like buying shares in Air New Zealand and then wanting to go and fly the planes. Could be a disaster. And moving on, Theodore Roosevelt said that real estate is the basis of all wealth. And in fact, all wealth since the beginning of time has been founded in real estate. Yes, I know some of you are going to say, but Bill Gates didn't need real estate. Well, maybe he needed real estate to get his business going, but I don't think that's where they're coming from. They're talking about creating wealth through owning property. McDonald's, what's their business? Can anyone tell me? Well done. They own all their own premises. Well, not all of them. Some of them they've had to rent, but in most cases they buy their own real estate in prime positions, and that's what their prime business is. That's where they make their wealth. And an interesting thing is, what percentage of the world's wealthy, you guys at the back know the answer there, what percentage of the world's wealthy have inherited their money? You know the answer too. Anyone else? Any ideas? What did you say? 50%, 80%? Of the world's millionaires have inherited. Any ideas? No? 5%? You're very close. It's less than 10%. Most of the people that are wealthy in the world today have worked hard and earned their own money. So don't leave it to children. They're just going to burn it up. Spend it yourself. And they earn, those wealthy people earn their money through leverage and capital appreciation. Certainly not through selling hamburgers one at a time on the amount earned from each one. And Fortune magazine states that 97 out of 100 self-made millionaires made their fortune through real estate investing. So I think we're on the right track somehow. So what investment is as safe as houses? Have you heard people say, come into the scheme, it's as safe as houses? I say, no. I'm going to go into the scheme that is safe as houses. I'm going to go into houses. You can't be more safe as houses than that. And if I can ask you a question, what, in your opinion, is the most conservative institution in the world? Any ideas? Banks. That would be the most conservative institution in the world. And the banks will lend you up to, in some cases, 100% to buy a property. Go along and ask them for $500,000 to buy some Air New Zealand shares and see what they say. And even if they said yes, I'd be very reluctant to borrow it and go and do that, because you'd be better off down at Sky City. Real estate provides the 4 criteria to a fantastic investment. I believe they're the only 4 criteria out there. If anyone's got others, let me know. Passive income and cash flow, appreciation, tax advantages, and leverage. Your share certificates, you don't get, in shares you do not get leverage. Don't think you get tax advantages. You would get appreciation, and you would get passive income and cash flow. Although with shares, I've seen a lot of them hanging on walls, but I've never seen houses hanging on walls. At least there's still a solid asset there. So how many years does it take for property to double in price? Now, this is not a get-rich scheme that I'm trying to put you into or tell you about. All the information I try and put forward is as conservative as possible. A lot of people haven't survived the biggest crash that's just been through. I've seen a lot of very, very wealthy people in property, the high flyers, hit the deck. I'm sure we all have. But those that have been conservative and consistent and followed the rules, it's not a get-rich scheme, it's a long-term investment property is. And this shows it. And Nick Tuffley, ASB's chief economist, I'm sure you all know him. He's often on the morning news, and he does a lot of presentations. And Nick's put this together for me, and every time I do a talk, I hound him for an update. And from June 61, that's from when he started his figures. June 61 to 73 took 11 years and 9 months for property to double in value. 73 to 79, 6 years and 3 months. 79 to 84, 4 years and 9 months. What years were those? The 70s. Very high inflation. There you go. So for those years, property doubled very quickly. I'll give you my opinion on that, on where we're going forward from here, and I'm not an economist. 79 to 84, we've covered that. 84 to 93 was 8 years and 6 months, and 93 to 2003 is 10 years. And from 2003 to now, we haven't had a doubling yet. So Nick has suggested that we, even though it's 8.25 years, if we take it back for the last 50 years, that we work on 10 years, so we take out those high inflation years. But I ask you to think about one thing. We've got $3 trillion created out of thin air from America for a loan for this crash. They've created a whole lot of euros out of thin air. They're going to do it again to try and bail out Spain and Italy. The world cannot pay back the debt, and that's why they're tippling on a crash. There's only one thing that can save it. It's logical. You have to devalue what the money's worth. There's one way of doing that. And that is to print more. And America started doing that. They said they're just going to keep printing the dollars. They've got printing machines and lots of paper. They're going to print it out. What's going to happen? Lots of money is going to flood in, and it's going to devalue what the money's worth, so that when they pay back the debt, they're paying back less than they have to, but it settles things down. I'm not an economist, but that's just my personal opinion where I think it's going to go. They can't afford to raise interest rates because countries will go bankrupt, and they can't bankrupt them. Countries have to be able to pay those debts back. They have to be able to pay the interest. You lift the interest rate now, you've got Greece history, Spain history, and probably Italy as well, if not the rest of Europe, and it'll start a crash. They can't do it. So that's my 5 cents worth on that. I'm not talking on economy, but just property. So we'll stay there, and we'll just work on 10 years for this exercise. I like to think of my investment properties as my little geese. If you think of little geese that you buy, and, well, you have in your garden, and they slowly get bigger as you nurture them. And then when they get a little bit bigger, they get this golden tinge to their feathers, and those will become your golden geese. And then you get a nice big fat one, golden feathers, and starts laying eggs, and your golden goose lays a golden egg. Now, when you decide that you want to sell a property because you have to get your money out, that's the biggest myth. You don't have to sell a house or property to get your money out. In fact, that's not a clever way to do it. You revalue the property, you keep it there, and leave the goose laying the golden egg for you. Don't slaughter it and put it on the dining room table, please, because you end the value. You end the income, you end the benefit. If you've got problems with tenants and you want to maximize your return, use a property manager. So, we've got all our little golden geese and our golden eggs together. So how does the strategy work? You've got your own home that you currently own now, and I'm just taking this is just concepts. We would hope that you would have some equity in your property now. If you don't, you're going to have to wait a few years till you've built up some. You might not yet own your own home. That might be the next thing on the cards. But where we are in the property cycle now, we've been through the biggest crash since the Great Depression, and property is still winning the race. So 380,000 to 480 would not be an unreasonable gain. In fact, that wouldn't be an unreasonable gain in this area over the last couple of years. We've had some tremendous shifts in value because it was very depressed. And so the banks will lend you out of that free equity, that $100,000, they will lend 90% on that. And that frees up $90,000 tax-free. You don't pay tax on that. It's not income. It's borrowings. and you can purchase a second property. You can either keep your own home or buy an investment property. So with the banks lending for investment properties now, because that's that 90% you've lent off your own home, for your investment properties, banks will actually allow you to put in only a 10% deposit. So you might be able to do 2 properties with this scenario I'm going to put forward to you now. Could I ask you guys to hand those forms out now, please, Leona? Thank you. So your purchase price is $400,000 for your property number 1, your investment property, and your 20% deposit's $80,000. You put no cash in. That's the equity from your first home as a deposit. There's the $80,000 there out of that $100,000. And remember, the tenant pays the mortgage, or most of it anyway. At the moment, you should be able to buy a property returning you between 5.5% and 6%. If you hunt around and you're smart with how you get do-ups and do a little bit to it, you can probably stretch that up to 7.5%. I recently did one in Browns Bay, and we managed to get that to 7.6%. Certainly wasn't that when I bought it, but you've got to see the opportunities. But 5.5% to 6% is about what we're running up here on the peninsula if you just buy a property to rent it out. And which is at BNZ at the moment, 4.99%, Scott, which any other banks at 4.99%? Yeah, so you can get finance for under 5% and get return of 6%, 1% profit straight away. Don't put it in your pocket because that's going to change. But as it changes, the prices will go up. And in a nutshell, that's what it is. 880,000 is where you start. In 10 years' time, 1.7 million. In 20 years' time, 3.5 million. Remember that 12,000 a month you had to save? Don't have to anymore. Your tenant did it for you, and the golden goose just got up and grew big and started laying you the eggs. So in 20 years' time, when you're ready for your retirement, you have quite a lot more than the 1.9 million that you need. You're now actually in a situation where you can have a fully paid up house, plus probably 80,000 or more, because the beauty of property, there's about a 5.5%, 6% return on the rental, against the value of the property, rather than 3.15% at the bank. So now you might be sitting on 120,000 a year income or more. And that's only just with one property, one investment property. So it's a no-brainer. Yes.
So the bank is, one thing is what money you got to put in, but they look as well at what you earn and your ability to repay.
Thank you. That's a brilliant question. The question was, it's one thing being able to go to the bank, but they look at what you earn. And you don't have to earn a lot to qualify. Scott, would you like to elaborate on that with earnings? You don't need huge earnings to qualify for a loan for a $400,000 property, for example?
Yeah, that's true for your first one. It does get harder as you accumulate property because the banks scale back the rental return, but each bank has slightly different criteria in that regard, and probably there reaches a point where it's better not to be dealing with just one bank and having a portfolio amongst the lenders.
Yeah.
And there are, depending on circumstances, some individuals may be self-employed and their financials don't reflect their true earning capacity. There's different loans that may cater to those people that could help with qualifying on the income side of things. But yeah, definitely the rent comes in and helps pay the loan.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Scott. Appreciate it. Yeah, if you want to speak some more to Scott afterwards around that, that's good. But I'm glad you raised that because it's something I haven't covered in the talk, is that you don't have to be wealthy to be able to get into the property game. In fact, I know a guy who's a millionaire and he battles to get a loan because he's got no income. He's retired and he's got no income. If you've got no income, the banks aren't going to lend to you. But you don't need to be wealthy and you don't need to have assets. You probably 3 or 6 months. 6 months in a job is probably enough, Scotty? Would it?
Yeah, 3 months plus.
3 months plus in a job, and you just show regular income last 3 months of earnings, and the banks are there to lend you the money. The banks are lending to people. They don't, when you start getting too big, and exactly as Scott says, you get to know all the banks because you don't want to have too much with one bank. So depends where you're playing in the game. But if you're just going to have one investment property, just do it with one bank and you should be fine. Well, that puts us in question time. So that was the next thing. So thanks for starting the question time for us. Any questions from anyone?
What is meant by the term leverage?
Leverage is when, probably the best way to explain it is, let's say you want to invest in shares. And so you go and buy shares, but you've got, say, 50,000, what did we work on there? We've got 80,000 saved. We've got $80,000 saved. So we go down and we buy $80,000 worth of shares. But we can buy a $400,000 house with $80,000 because the bank will lend us the rest. So the capital growth is on 400,000, not on the 80. So the best form of leverage is that example of Susan where she bought the house for 180,000 and she put in 36,000 and then she made, so that's out of leverage. So she's made an 88% return on what money she put in, but the investment didn't. It only made a 9 or 10% return. So she's leveraged off the whole thing, but she's only put that much in. That's called leverage. And you get that, probably the only thing that will do that for you is property. I think the banks, if you went with 300,000, wanted to borrow 100,000 to buy Air New Zealand shares, they might fund you up the 100,000, but they're certainly not going to, and I think they'd be reluctant to do that either. I think you'd have to show them that you've got substantial wealth elsewhere and that they'd be safe with getting their money back. Good question, thank you. Anything else?
Your 6% return on the coast.
Yes.
Into account of the overheads like rates.
Is the 6% return on properties up here, does that include the rates and other expenses that might come off the property? The answer is no. It's a straight cash on cash return. So it's a return of the rent as to the purchase price of the property. The expenses in a property are not huge. You probably, I normally put aside 1,000 to 2,000 per property for maintenance per annum, and rates are generally about 2,500, 2,000 to 2,500 per property. Depends. Some of them might be a little bit more. I like the two renters. I like to get two on one title, so it works out a little bit better. And I've got one at the moment that I've just spent $70,000 on in repairs and maintenance, but I've just bought it, and that's been a major do-up. So it's, but going forward now, I wouldn't need to spend more than $1,000 a year for probably the next 10 or 20 years. So I consider that a capital input for that property, and that's how I treat it. But thanks for the question.